Koenig seeks Director of Major Gifts and Planned Giving to advance philanthropic support. Learn more at knba.org. Koenig seeks a General Manager of Media to lead content and operations. Learn more at knba.org.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. National Congress of American Indians President Mark Macarro says his message at this moment in time is both moral and practical. In his annual State of Indian Nations address earlier today, he said this moment in time is one of profound risk, but he also says it is a time of opportunity. He compared the past 12 months to the beginning of the Indian civil rights movement more than 50 years ago. We'll hear excerpts from Macarro's speech today and get reactions right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull, sitting in for Antonia Gonzalez. For decades, Native women and other women of color were subjected to forced sterilization by the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service. Last week, New Mexico lawmakers introduced a memorial to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would conduct a study into the history and continuing impacts of this abuse. KUNM's Jeanette DeDios reports.
Senate Memorial 14 includes research dating to the 1970s, which shows between 25 and 50% of Indigenous women were sterilized, with some of the highest incidents occurring in New Mexico. The memorial would develop a plan to create a state Truth and Reconciliation Commission to research and find all cases of sterilization in the state, gather survivor testimony, and review and recommend educational policy. Keely Badger is a human rights advocate who wrote her dissertation on the forced sterilization of Native women. Lawmakers asked her about challenges finding and accessing records.
I do think that the requests have to come from an official state body, official agencies, to get to the heart of this information. It is going to be more than one person's ability to accumulate this information.
She says this may have been intentional by the states.
At a national level, they have sealed some of these records for a reason, in the same way that a lot of the information about the boarding school system was very, very challenging, took decades and decades of research to accumulate to get to a point where we could have a national apology. I believe that this is one of those situations where it's going to require real political will and advocacy from civil society groups to get to the real heart of this from a national perspective.
If the memorial goes into law, New Mexico would be the first state in the nation to formally investigate and acknowledge these violations. The memorial will head to the Senate floor for a vote, and if passed, will go to the House of Representatives. For National Native News, I'm Jeanette DeDios.
Last week, thousands of members from the White Mountain Apache tribe went to the polls to vote in a primary election that resulted in the sitting chairman losing his chance at another term. KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrazio reports.
In a three-way race, Chairman Casey Velasquez earned a little over 400 votes, while his challengers both received nearly 4 times as much, according to the tribe's election commission. In the end, though, longtime White River School Board member Orlando Carroll got the most votes by a margin of more than 50 ballots. He will face off against Councilman Gary Alchese in the April general election. Also on Wednesday, the tribe announced that a special prosecutor declined to criminally charge Velasquez under tribal law for allegations of sexual harassment against the HR director. A civil investigation by the tribe is still ongoing. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrazio.
The Seahawks, Super Bowl champions for the second time.
And you'll be seeing lots of commemorative Seahawks swag now that Seattle's NFL team has won Super Bowl 60. The Hawks beat the New England Patriots 29-13. The BBC reports that many Native American and First Nations people appreciate the team's logo. Turns out that it's based on a carved transformation mask from the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation from the late 1800s. The logo was chosen by the Seahawks manager in the 1970s. Seattle's Burke Museum traced the origins of it to a photo of a ceremonial mask in an old art book. This led them to the Hudson Museum in Maine. The mask was loaned to Seattle for a ceremony of tribal members and team representatives. The BBC reports that unlike other Major League sports teams, the Seahawks logo hasn't sparked backlash because it respectfully borrows from indigenous culture and doesn't resort to racist stereotypes. In fact, some indigenous people from Canada and the U.S. say it's inspired them to learn more of their own culture. A ceremony and parade for the Seahawks will be held in Seattle Wednesday morning. This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Hear that? Tribal college faculty do so much, one can't say it all here. Nothing but respect. Visit mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. National Congress of American Indians President Mark Macarro says sovereignty is not created by treaties or Congress, and the American Constitution did not define who Native people are. These are among messages during Macarro's State of Indian Nations address earlier today. We're going to hear a part of that speech today. It is the signature event during the NCAI Winter Executive Session in Washington, D.C. Here is President Mark Macarro.
Meyuyam palovamu echnai. Lavakapiva atwanat iva upum esh. My relatives, honorable leaders, members of Congress, administration officials, and allies, I greet you with respect, humility, and gratitude. My name is Mark Macarro, and I have the honor of serving as the President of the National Congress of American Indians. I'm also the chairman of the Pechanga Band of Indians, Payom Kowachum. This State of Indian Nations is more than a speech. It is Indian country's unified, formal message grounded in our inherent sovereignty and our government-to-government relationship with the United States. Today, we gather not just as representatives of our individual nations, but as relatives bound by shared history, shared responsibility, and shared destiny. We gather as tribal governments and as peoples, carrying obligations to those who came before us and those not yet born. We gather at a moment of profound risk, yet in every challenge, there's also opportunity. And we gather with a unifying purpose: to build a strong and sustained tribal movement to protect the sovereignty of our nations, not for symbolism, not for performative meetings, but for results. Results for our citizens, our ceremonies, our lands, our waters, and for our children. Long before there was a United States, there were sovereign tribal nations, governments with laws, languages, economies, and lands shaped by the tens of thousands of years on this continent. Our sovereignty was not created by treaties, nor granted by Congress. It is inherent and existed before colonization. Treaties did not give us sovereignty, they recognized it. The Constitution did not define us, it acknowledged us. Federal laws did not create our rights, it memorialized them. And yet, for centuries, our sovereignty has been attacked, and attempts continue to constrain and diminish it. Yet our nations continue to govern, continue to lead, to teach, to resist, and to rise. We've endured removals, allotments, termination, policies built to erase us, and yet we're still here, still governing, still building, still rising. The fundamental truth that binds all tribal nations together is that we are sovereign. We always were, we always will be. Now, the United States is strongest when it honors that truth, not when it tests it. This moment, right now, echoes another pivotal moment in the history of Indian country, and that is the Indian civil rights movement of the 1970s, catalyzed by the American Indian movement, a time when Native activists occupied Alcatraz and Wounded Knee, when fishing rights families stood in the rivers to defend what treaties promised, when grassroots leaders demanded tribal control over education, healthcare, and child welfare, where everyday Native citizens, grandmas, students, veterans' families refused to disappear and just go away. That movement changed federal law, it reshaped the public consciousness, and ignited this modern era of tribal self-determination. That victory did not come from Washington. It came from the people. Today's movement is key to understanding what happens next. Without a plan, tribes will go from one crisis to the next crisis. Just look at the last 12 months. Like a GPS destination, if we know where we're going, getting sidetracked due to political skullduggery won't be fatal because we know our path forward. For example, the recent remarks about tribes by Oklahoma Governor Stitt are appalling. And that level of willful ignorance runs deep throughout America. If we don't have a plan for educating America, these ignorant pronouncements become truths. The sovereignty movement must be a people-powered movement rooted in the same spirit that carried us through the 1970s. And here in 2026, that spirit must show up as organized civic power locally, regionally, and nationally. Sovereignty is not defended once. It is defended every year, every budget cycle, every court term, and every legislative session, every time a state tests boundaries on our jurisdictions, not just by chairpersons and presidents, not just by attorneys and advocates, but by citizens, those who vote, who teach, who speak their language, who practice their culture, who defend their treaty rights, and who hold governments accountable. Now, for too long, Indian country has been forced to fight over scraps, to operate within systems that treat federal and treaty obligations as optional or negotiable, as if the resources promised to Native Americans were charity instead of payment for land and peace and partnership. For Congress to fulfill the United States trust responsibility to Indian country, the entire tribal budget must be funded, an annual non-competitive base budget, or give our stolen lands back. Let's state this truth clearly. There is enough. There has always been enough. The only scarcity is political will. The trust responsibility is not discretionary. Treaty obligations are not optional. Native lives cannot be balanced against other priorities like an afterthought. The United States is fully capable of meeting its legal and moral obligations to tribal nations. Full funding for Indian health care, education, housing, infrastructure, law enforcement, and disaster relief is not a gift. It is the fulfillment of solemn agreements embedded in the founding of this country. That means the funding must be reliable, forward-looking, and protected from disruption. So our clinics stay open, our schools stay stable, our law enforcement stays staffed, and our programs are not whiplashed by uncertainty. And honoring these obligations is not only good for Indian country, it strengthens the United States itself. Indeed, as Indian country goes, so goes America. So, my message today is both moral and practical. Honor the treaties, respect sovereignty, and invest in what works, tribal self-determination. Now, sovereignty is strongest when we stand together. No nation stands alone. No court case is isolated. No attack on tribal authority is limited to one region. When one nation's rights are threatened, all nations must stand together. All nations must stand with them. So when a state challenges tribal jurisdiction, we will respond collectively. When federal agencies ignore consultation, our united voice must be unmistakable. And when policies are developed without tribes at the table from the beginning, outcomes are predictable: inefficiency, conflict, litigation, and harm. Consultation done early is not just respectful, it saves time, it saves money, and it builds trust. Unity does not erase our differences, it allows our differences to strengthen us. And make no mistake, we stand in unity with all of our relatives in Minnesota.
That is NCAI President Mark Macarro speaking today in Washington, D.C. at the annual Winter Executive Session. If you would like to hear the full version of President Macarro's address, we have a link to it on our website, nativeamericacalling.com. We're going to take a break here in just a couple of minutes, and we'll get reactions from the address today from a guest that we have on the show. And I invite listeners to join the conversation. The number is 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. And there is a lot to unpack from the words we just heard from NCAI President Mark Macarro. He made comments like the U.S. is strongest when it honors truth, not challenges it. Referred to Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma recent comments as appalling, and mentioned that sovereignty is not defended once, but it is defended constantly by citizens who hold government accountable. If any of these comments, if any of these thoughts or insights, if they resonate with you, and if they make you feel a certain way, or they inspire you, or you have anything to share with regard to what the words we just heard were, give us a call. We really want to hear from some listeners today. Let's get some dialogue going with our audience. Again, that number is 1-800-99-NATIVE. That's the number, connects you to our Albuquerque studio. And of course, you can also use our social media platforms if you would like to engage with us that way. You can go to Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Threads, or just visit our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and you can communicate with us and other listeners as well. Sovereignty for results, not symbolism. That was another key moment of what we just heard from NCAI President Mark Macarro. Sovereignty is not given, it is recognized by the federal government. Again, more insights, more powerful words from President Mark Macarro of the National Congress of American Indians. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break. You might be eligible for $200 more than usual on your federal income tax refund this year. The increase in the child tax credit is one of many changes to keep in mind when filing this year's tax return. We'll get updates on what stands out with the 100 or so changes to the tax code since last year. That's on the next Native America Calling.
Support by the American Indian College Fund. The American Indian College Fund provides millions of dollars of scholarships to thousands of Native students every year. Tribal citizens of every age and experience are eligible. The deadline for applications is May 31st, and you can find everything you need to apply at collegefund.org. That's collegefund.org, or by phone at 800-766-FUND. Education is the answer.
We're glad you're along with us today on Native America Calling. I'm your host, Sean Spruce. We just heard an excerpt from NCAI President Mark Macarro's 2026 State of Indian Nations address. It was delivered earlier today in Washington, D.C. This is a shortened version of the full event. If you'd like to explore the full version events, you can go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Right now, let's bring another voice in to gain insight on what we just heard. Joining us from Sonora, California is Dr. Renee Dittmer. She is a journalist and an independent consultant specializing in executive governance and economic development. Renee, good morning, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Good morning.
You are also a member of the Sioux Tribe of Chippewa Indians. I wanted to make sure I point that out as well.
Thank you very much. That is correct.
Absolutely. Now, President Mark Macarro, let's begin with the current moment he describes as echoing the beginning of the Indian civil rights movement and the formation of AIM. He talks about battles over fishing rights, other acts of resistance from everyday Native Americans. Are you hearing similar messages from other tribal leaders right now, Renee?
I don't know if they would put it in the same words that Macarro did, comparing it to AIM, which in my recollection, and I was young at the time, was considered quite violent. But what I do see is a lot of restlessness amongst tribes to obtain the goals that we set out 70 years ago or more now, almost 100 years in some cases, to finally achieve those goals. Sovereignty is at the top of that list. But my concern is that, and what I'm seeing on the ground, is that not only do most Americans not understand sovereignty, but even though we talk about it amongst ourselves as Indian nations, we really don't know what sovereignty is. And I'm going to be a political scientist here for a minute because I know that Governor Macarro is too. But so sovereignty actually has its tentacles in its roots in international law, and it includes territory, population, a government or an economy to support that, and then recognition by others, by equals. So we see that in the United Nations amongst the world nations, but we count on our sovereignty here in the United States for tribes to come from a recognition by our federal government. We have not done, I do not think, a good job of asserting our sovereignty, back to not understanding exactly what we need to do that, what the elements are. But also because the government is not serious about giving us sovereignty. They play at it, and that has been extremely destructive, and it's very discouraging. So that's what I'm seeing when I talk to tribal leadership, when I do my own work, when I write, that we do have a notion out there. But I think we need to consolidate it, understand it. And I'm a political scientist. I would like to see us brought under international law, because that is where true state-level sovereignty resides, at least the recognition part of it. And if we could achieve that, and I know that there are people working on that right now, that that may be a push, even though I will say the United States does not generally recognize international law as being a valid source of law.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, Renee. That would really be really historic if that were to take place, being acknowledged through international law as opposed to United States law. Let's go to the phones. This is Jen, who is listening online in East Texas, like she does every day. Hello, Jen. How you doing?
Oh, you bet. I listen every single day. If I miss it, I go back and I find it. But what I always listen to the speakers like Macarro when in this time that's so important, and everything he has said today, I want to repeat to everybody I know, and like your caller just said, I'm a Cherokee from East Texas, and I live in East Texas where it's so conservative that yesterday I had this experience with the lay minister of the church where I attend, which makes me question why am I in this church? Because he heard me telling someone talking about the Removal Act when we were in conversation, and he came over and he said, no land was taken. And he just denied everything that he had heard all his life. And he's from Oklahoma, where stat and people like that say what they like. But our educational attempts, I get on Facebook and I say things that are totally correct because I've researched them and I follow them, and then I only have a couple of people who come back and appreciate what I've said. So I don't know what we're going to do, but our education system is going backward, and it's going backward through the DEI program and so forth. So I really and truly, I feel so frustrated. Sometimes I don't want to be, forcing something down somebody's throat when they disagree, but it just makes me sad.
I understand, Jen, and thank you for calling in. It's always great when Jen joins the show. She has so much to offer with regard to her insights and her experience as a Cherokee woman living in East Texas. And Renee, let's talk more about what Jen just mentioned with regard to Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, because Mark Macarro did specifically call him out. And of course, Governor Stitt, he is Cherokee, and he's the Native American with the highest elected executive office in the country. And Macarro was referring to comments made by Governor Stitt during his State of Oklahoma address a week ago when he said Native Americans should not be held to a different standard in the context of current events to strip diversity initiatives from the federal government, from educational programs, other areas. If you could, we're going to play some more audio here in just a couple of minutes, so just be mindful of that. But I do want to pose this question before we do that. Do you hear similar viewpoints, Renee, from other elected leaders right now, what we heard from Governor, or the comments made by Governor Stitt?
We have a whole national leadership that does not understand the Indian people. They don't understand our history and everything that your guest just mentioned. And it's because it isn't being taught in the schools, and it certainly isn't being taught from a point of history. And so if you combine those two things, we see the result that we're getting. The other thing I really resent is the government throwing us in with DEI. First of all, none of the groups that were thrown in DEI should have been thrown in there as like, okay, you're special groups and the only way you can make it is if we give you special status. That's just not true in my experience. But I also think it was an insulting thing to do. Stitt, he's a diehard Republican, so what else is he going to say if he wants any support from Washington, D.C.? They don't have any respect for us. Just look what they've done to our budget twice now. We've had Trump in office for 2 terms. They've cut our budget back to less than bare bones for survival, from what they owe us treaty-wise, and from what we really need to survive and thrive. So I don't have any respect for an opinion like that. It's underinformed, and I don't know why the Cherokee Nation would support anybody. I know that he's the governor of Oklahoma, but he had to have had support from his own tribe to get
Well, they've had there's been a lot of back and forth between Governor Stitt and Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. I know there's no love lost between those two individuals.
Probably not.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your comments there, Renee. Let's hear President Mark Macarro finish up here. This is the remainder of the State of Indian Nations address from earlier today at the NCAI Winter Executive Session in Washington, D.C.
Sovereignty is impacted everywhere federal decisions are made, and that is the work of this movement through the next 25 years. My relatives, If we're to build a movement that matches the magnitude of our responsibilities, we need an anchor at a home where unity, strategy, and purpose all come together. Well, that place is with the National Congress of American Indians. For more than 80 years, NCAI has been the unifying voice of tribal nations. And today, as sovereignty faces both new threats and historic opportunities, NCAI must once again serve as the movement's strategic center. It is the builder, it is the protector, and it is the amplifier. NCAI is where tribal nations translate shared values into shared action, across regions, across party lines, and across issues. Anywhere sovereignty is challenged, NCAI brings tribes together, coordinating rapid responses, developing shared messages, and ensuring Indian country speaks as one. In unity is power, and NCAI is your voice. This sovereignty movement cannot rest solely on the shoulders of its leaders. It must come from the people, the heart of this movement. NCAI helps tribes engage voters, train local advocates, build civic power, so every tribal citizen has a voice. Through fellowships, youth councils, internships, and leadership academies, NCAI prepares the next generation to carry the movement forward, just as young activists did in the 1970s civil rights era. Our youth are not merely the leaders of tomorrow, they are leading with us right now, and you saw that in these first two speeches today. They are revitalizing languages. They're advocating for climate action, organizing in their communities, and harnessing the power of social media unlike any other generation. Just as the young people of the 1970s filled the movement with courage and clarity, today's youth carry the next era of sovereignty. Our responsibility is to support them with resources, with mentorship, and with our trust. Finally, NCAI shapes the national narrative on all things tribal, ensuring that treaties are understood, sovereignty is respected, and the trust responsibility is recognized as fundamental to the American system of government. In this movement, NCAI is not simply an institution, it is a leader, a protector, and a holder of the vision. So today, I call on all tribal nations, all citizens, all youth, all elders, all allies, and all leaders to stand together. Demand full funding of the trust and treaty obligations, not someday, but now. Flex our sovereignty with our governments, courts, lands, and communities. Engage citizens and grow the political power of every tribal nation. Elections matter. My tribal leaders, lead boldly, govern without apology, and protect your citizens. Stand with other nations and remember who we are. To our tribal citizens and our youth, claim your voice, vote, advocate, hold your leaders responsible. Learn your nation's story and speak the truth of your nation's sovereignty in your communities and schools. This movement is yours. Lead with courage, step forward without fear, and your ideas, bring your energy and your voice, because that's the spark that this movement needs. Your voice is power. Use it. Step up. Speak out. You're changing the world. Now, elders, continue guiding with us. Continue guiding us with wisdom, teachings, and prayers for our armor. Your wisdom is our shield. Your prayers are our strength. Keep reminding us who we are so we never confuse urgency with compromise. Now, let us rise as one people, all nations and all generations, and across every division that others have tried to place between us. Let's build a movement that is bold, relentless, and unstoppable. Let's protect our sovereignty, not just for today, but for all time. Let's be good ancestors so that when our future generations look back on this moment, they'll say, they did not wait, they did not compromise, they rose, they fought, and they spoke. Tribal nations rise. The movement begins and nothing will stop us. We are the first people of this continent. We are sovereign tribal nations, and we will never back down. So let's walk forward together in unity, in strength, and abundance, and commit to one another that we will not just survive this moment, we will shape it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is NCAI President Mark Macarro from earlier today, delivering the State of Indian Nations address. We're going to take another short break here in just a moment. We'll talk more with our guest, Dr. Renee Dittmer. And, of course, the phone lines are open for listeners who would like to join us as well. 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. That is the number if you would like to join us, or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. That will work just as well. And again, more to take home with regard to President Mark Macarro. Talked a lot about sovereignty and the significance of sovereignty and our history as Native people and what we've endured and what we've had to face since time immemorial. And I think so many of us can relate to some of those words, some of those thoughts with regard to who our ancestors are and the people who have come before us. He also made a comment that I thought was interesting. He said, NCAI is your voice, your voice. And I'm curious to know from listeners right now, how effective do you think NCAI is in motivating and inspiring regular, everyday Native people like you and me? Not necessarily tribal leaders or key stakeholders in government organizations or with large Native-led nonprofits and things of that nature, but simply regular people. Do you think NCAI does a good job of representing you? I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear from some listeners right now who have thoughts with regard to what that means. And again, the number 1-800-99-NATIVE. And if you don't feel like calling in, of course, you can go to our Facebook page or Instagram or Blue Sky or Threads, or to our website, nativeamericacalling.com, where you can also listen to the full recording of today's address. And you can comment that way, but I would really like it if some people called again. We heard from Jen earlier in East Texas, and I want to hear from some more listeners as well. So give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Again, a short break. We'll come back, and we'll talk more with Dr. Renee Dittmer. So stay with us.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. Gone's last horse rider and regalia parade takes place at 4 p.m. both days. Tickets at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Kaufman & Associates is a Native-owned and led consulting firm supporting Native communities with culturally grounded solutions to shape Indigenous futures. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
Thank you for tuning in today to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. NCAI President Mark Macarro just delivered the annual State of Indian Nations address today from the Executive Council Intercession in Washington, D.C. We have heard a shortened version of that address, and I am joined today by journalist and economic development consultant Renee Dittmer. And just before the break, we heard President Macarro offer a message we've heard from him before, a call for Native youth to use their voices and for elders to continue to provide wisdom. Renee, what else from today's speech stands out to you?
Well, sovereignty was certainly the banner of the speech that he made. But, I made comments earlier about that, about whether or not that is something that we are even ready to broach. And I say that very carefully because I think most people would tell you that we're already sovereign. We need to look at that again. The other things I see on the ground, and with all due respect to President Macarro, he is in a very privileged position at the Pechanga tribe. They have been, and he has been, very successful there. So when he talks about what he sees around them, that's a little bit different than the other 108 tribes here in California, just California alone. I've been a tribal administrator at 4 different tribes and worked at my own tribe. And we are not there yet. People are much more practical than idealistic. They want practical things. Just to, I'll say this as gently as I can. From my seat as a tribal administrator, the most frequent request that I got was actually for cash. People needed money for different things, and they thought that the tribe should provide it for them. And some things were definitely things we needed to address. Other things were outrageous. And so when you say, well, let's be idealistic here. Let's, let our elders be our wisdom and our prayer leaders and strength, and let's let our youth, learn and lead. They are not there yet at these at the tribes. Our youth are foundering. They are failing. We cannot get our kids to stay in college if we can get them to apply. And it's not for lack of intelligent youth. It is just they move off the reservation and they have a hard time. We have had a lot more luck with people that did not grow up on the reservation, I'm sad to say, go off to college and become, more successful, and then be able to try to give back to the tribes. And the tribes don't want it. They push it away. We're too educated or whatever, fill in the blank.
So I think a lot of listeners can connect with that, yeah.
Yeah, I think they probably can. And there's a tension there that we have to resolve before NCAI can be a unifying voice. And let me just address that very quickly. Both NCAI and BIA are almost, I'm not going to call them a joke at the local tribal level, but they certainly do not represent what is going on the ground in the tribes in general. From a strategic point of view, perhaps. They have, they're in Washington, D.C., so they could have a bigger voice there. I don't think they do. In fact, if anything, I think we're declining. The last general meeting that I went to was up here in Sacramento several years ago, and I made a decision at that point that I wasn't going to go back until we refound, till NCAI refound its own mission. Those are harsh words, and I'm sure, President Macarro is probably going to react to those, and that's fine, but I just want to spur them on to looking for that unifying voice. And it's not going to be in Washington, D.C. It's going to be across the country. And if they want to get youth involved, they really have to figure out how to do that in a meaningful, local way. And BIA, in my opinion, should be eliminated. So,
tell us what you really think, Renee.
Yeah. yeah. I know. I'm going to draw a lot of fire for that, but. Yeah.
No, appreciate you being real, really putting it on the line and talking about what you really think and what your concerns are. This is good.
I'm a pragmatist when it comes to politics. And so when I look at things, I'm like, is this doing any good, really? Mm-hmm. Because I've made a lot of high-level policy. I worked in D.C. for 27 years, not necessarily with natives, but on other projects that had a huge impact, especially after 9/11. But, writing all that policy and then going out and implementing it, that was the other thing I did, was took it to, I was working for DOD, taking it out to the bases and saying, am I just talking through my hat? Is this useful? Can you do anything with it? I don't see that being done with Indian policy.
Okay.
And we are hurting out here.
Let's hear An excerpt from the congressional response to the State of Indian Nations address. We're going to do that right now. And this year, the response was given by Senator Tina Smith, who is a Democrat from Minnesota. She began her speech by acknowledging the turmoil that continues in her state because of major crackdowns by immigration agents, especially in Minnesota, and the acts of resistance by citizens. Here is Senator Tina Smith, and this is an excerpt from the congressional response to the State of Indian Nations today in Washington, D.C. Let's hear it.
Over the last weeks, countless Native folks have been stopped and questioned and even detained by immigration enforcement agents. It is cruelly ironic that Native people, the indigenous people of this land, are being accused of illegally immigrating. But what gives me hope? What gives me hope are the incredible people of Minnesota who are showing the rest of the country how to stand against this violence and how to stand strong for our shared humanity. And I see every day powerful Native organizations across the state who know how to mobilize to protect their neighbors. And it is not lost on me that Minneapolis is the birthplace of the American Indian movement, and the relatives of those leaders are organizing to protect us today. I saw this firsthand a couple of weeks ago when I stopped by Powwow Grounds Coffee, which is a coffee shop and community hub in Little Earth. I stopped by to bring donations and to check in with the Native organizers. Powwow Grounds is just down the street from the American Indian Movement building. And shortly before we pulled up, a vehicle full of ICE agents had just driven away from Powwow Grounds, driven away by the indigenous protectors who blew their whistles to sound the alarm. And this is still happening today in Minneapolis and Minnesota. And yet, the mutual aid networks through the Tawahe Foundation and others have sprung to action in support of the community. Leaders like Sean Sherman and Rachel Dion Thunder have organized public advocacy and outcry to demand justice and to tell about the impacts of Operation Metro Surge on small businesses and farmers. I am so proud of Minnesota's response to this crisis and the unity and dignity and strength that we have shown. But it weighs heavily on me how this is re-traumatizing Native people in my state. At the core of this, at the heart of this, we return to core principles and the values and obligations laid out in the Constitution of the United States: freedom for all people and the rule of law. And let me be clear. This U.S. Constitution recognizes, it does not create, it recognizes tribal nations' inherent sovereignty and the rights to govern yourselves. This sovereignty is not created by the United States or our treaties or our Constitution. It is inherent and it is fundamental. And it is the starting place for all of our mutual agreements and treaties and obligations. And it cannot be abrogated by any leader. These core principles, inherent tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and the federal government's trust and treaty obligations, these are at the core of NCAI's purpose as a unifying voice and a strong, effective advocate for American Indians and Alaska Natives and the well-being of your people. Now, in his remarks, President Macarro talked about the challenges facing tribal nations, certainly, and also about the unity that can be found in your shared commitment to defending your inherent sovereignty. You are a movement for change and empowerment, NCAI. And this is so important because even in the face of the chaos and uncertainty and upheaval in Washington over the last year, tribal issues remain a source of common ground. Now, don't get me wrong. This has been an incredibly difficult year. So many of the federal government's commitments to you for government-to-government consultation, grants and agreements to fulfill commitments for your health and your housing and your education, land and water rights, all of this and more has been caught up in a cycle of destructive uncertainty, and this is unacceptable. And yet, tribal sovereignty is not a partisan issue. The coalition of leaders in Washington who understand tribal sovereignty is diverse. It stretches across ideological and political spectrums. These are not Democratic or Republican issues. And yet we also must be honest with ourselves. Both parties have failed historically and to this day to live up to these responsibilities.
That is an excerpt from the congressional response to the State of Indian Nations today in Washington, D.C., and that was Minnesota Senator Tina Smith. Renee, Tina Smith is leaving Congress at the end of the year, and Ojibwe Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan is going to be running for her seat. How much do we know about Peggy Flanagan and the state's connection, Minnesota, their connection to Native issues right now?
There is. From what I've read of her, I don't know her personally, but she is a grassroots kind of person. She grew up and in her early years spent a lot of time putting together community movements and just going from one thing to another to try to spur interest in Indian affairs there, or back into maybe reinfuse it into Minnesota's horizon there. Minnesota's always been a very, like Tina Smith said, a very, like the center really of kind of the Indian universe in terms of just pushback or organizing. And I think that Lieutenant Governor Flanagan will make an excellent candidate. We were looking forward to Governor Walz being perhaps elected and her ascending into the governorship there. And that would have been a first for Minnesota, but also for women in general. Understanding that we are mostly matriarchal tribes, it would have been a nice thing to see. But I think that having a grassroots organizer go into Congress would be a real plus. I look at her, I look at Adelita Grijalva, who replaced her father. I look at Jasmine Crockett, people that have come up from those kinds of movements or been themselves at the core of them, that they find their voice very quickly in Congress, and they have nothing to lose other than getting up and speaking a piece. And that's not a bad thing. So I'm looking forward to, hopefully I can't see her not winning, but then how she reacts when she gets on the Hill, because she's going to have to hit the ground running. It's going to be a big year at midterms, and she has an opportunity to really show people how things are done from the Indian point of view.
Renee, any other predictions or thoughts with regard to how the midterms are going to pan out here later this year?
Well, I do see a lot of groundswell. Everybody was surprised when California overwhelmingly voted for Prop 50. And I have to say I was surprised at how much vote it got, actually, because people were really, I live in a very red district here in California, and that wasn't a very popular idea, but the rest of the state bought off on it. In terms of the rest of politics, unless NCAI and the rest of the tribal leadership can agree on a way forward, actually put together a real strategic plan that has implementable things in it, they're not going to make any headway, even with a flip in color at the highest level. So we have to make our point with this government, because we are going to lose more every single budget year if we don't. And that is not good in an era where the number of people in tribes are growing and the number of tribes are growing. So,
Renee, thanks for coming on the show today. Come back soon. Don't stay away so long. I always enjoy talking with you.
Give me a call.
All right. Dr. Renee Dittmer joining us here today on Native America Calling. We're out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this show. But please join us again tomorrow. We're going to be talking about tax season and strategies to make the most of recent changes when filing your state and federal income tax returns. I'm Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
The faculty of tribal colleges and universities support their students in countless ways. They say I believe and offer help before it's asked.
Hear that? That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, cheer progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate healing.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.